You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back to episode 12 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Brendan. Caught me off guard asking me how I am before the intro, so how about yourself?
No scripts from me. So this week we're starting off with the first of our class deep dives, as Hayden and I break down each class and constructed with a focus on core fundamentals, way to build and play the hero, key cards, strengths and weaknesses, and how to win with it, and more importantly, how to beat it. This week we're starting with Wizard.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say before we get into it, Brendan, we had Kieran from Session Blood on a couple of weeks ago, and this is something that they had actually started to do, I guess, a bit of a class deep dive, as it were, into some things. And Kieran dubbed us spiritual successors to the show, so I feel like this is something we've wanted to do for a while. We chatted to Kieran about this, and we knew it's something that we wanted to get out to listeners and players around the world, because each class in Flesh and Blood is so unique. So I'm excited to get into it. We'd start with Wizard, because it's Brendan's favorite hero, apparently.
favorite class, not favorite hero. But yeah, this was actually my favorite episodes of Session Blood. I remember I did a road trip to Colorado, and it was like, 14, 15 hours. And I just cruised through the whole entire Session Blood kind of archives of all the classes. And I listened to year one with them on Runeblade, which was interesting. But you were hyping up those Sutcliffe research notes quite a bit.
I definitely was, yeah. Unfortunately, it hasn't quite come to be.
Not yet. It's printed for the future, I'm sure. So, obviously, heading into our first section, Hayden, what have you been playing, this past week in Flesh and Blood?
Yeah, well, I'm in lockdown at the moment. So, here in Sydney, Australia, we've just gone into lockdown last week. So, unfortunately, no in-person events for me in the last week. But, quite a bit of testing this week. So, Road to Nationals coming up. Starting to think about Class Constructed, or I guess have been thinking about Class Constructed since Monarch came out. Now just really starting to put in some hours and get some games in. And just doing a lot of, I guess, in spare time and with a bit of downtime at the moment with lockdown testing, one thing, but also theory crafting a bunch as well. So mine's racing a little bit at the moment. But yeah, what about you, Brendan?
Yeah, so definitely been doing a lot of testing, and it's all Class Constructed at this point. But also playing a ton of armories. So, I plan to top 4 a Road to Nationals. I think I have a very, very good chance of doing so. But I will make 2,000,000% sure that I qualify on XP. So I just will have all my bases covered. So there's no way I'm not going to Nationals. So yeah, still grinding the armories and all that fun stuff, which is most of it's Blitz, some of it is Class Constructed. After playing the ones that were Classic, I definitely still prefer Blitz for armories, just because they go, they have a crazy, kind of time duration.
Get in and out.
If they're not, but also, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat with you. Just been doing a lot of testing, so I'm kind of Classic Constructed out in terms of what I enjoy. So yeah, just want to get back to the Kano, get back to Blitz, and just burn some people out.
Mm-hmm. Good plan.
But so heading into the news, I know you talked about Road to Nationals. Any other developments on the side? I know they announced it. A lot of stores have put them up. What does it look like on your end over in Australia?
Yeah, so I think that's first place to start is Road to Nationals starts basically in a month's time, 4 weeks' time from now. We're going to see the first Road to Nationals, so super exciting. We've just wrapped up Skirmish Season 2. You can find on the event finder, you can go and see all those Road to Nationals. I imagine that the official document for Road to Nationals will come out. I know it's been sent to stores because some stores have actually shared that document online. And of course, with that season running from I believe last weekend in July through to the start of September, and then we go into the calling season for North America, and then we go into the national season. So the end of the year is really packed with organized play and high-level events, which is super exciting. So I'm sure if you haven't already, make sure you get onto fabtcg.com, jump on the event finder. You can literally just type in your country, state, wherever you are, and find those Road to Nationals around you. A lot of them have links as well to the actual the Facebook event or the website where the store has put up entries or even just descriptions, so that you can either get an entry, get in contact, or whatever it might be to get a place in those events.
Yeah, the amount of organized play is just astounding now that's coming at us. Because like, if let's say like my expectation for what we would see in 2021 was like a 2, I got smacked with a 10. Now I'm like, okay, now I got to fly to all these callings, I book all these hotels. By the way, if you're listening to this and you're planning to go to Vegas, the Vegas weekend that lines up with like what is essentially opening day for the new Las Vegas Raiders. Whew,
Oh,
the hotels are like super expensive, and I'm sure they're actually gonna like kind of sell out. So definitely book your accommodation soon. Channel Fireball did mention they would have some sort of discounted hotels that they'll be giving information on later, but there are some reasonably priced ones that are near the convention center. I recommend you check them out as soon as possible because it does line up with that weekend that's like huge for football. Um, yeah, so yeah, kind of keep your head up for that one. Um, also, I wanted to talk about we launched a sort of YouTube exclusive last week called Arsenal Pastime in the Round. It is a form of this podcast, but completely free form. It's just me and Hayden talking about the game, talking about life, and we kind of have like 4 or 5 talking points, and after that, there's no scripts, nothing like that. So, and we're really giving like our opinions on the game, um, and just generally being okay with saying things that are maybe more controversial or just more personal. We're on the podcast you're listening to right now, Arsenal Pass, we really focus on just delivering as much value as possible and kind of the most confined, allotment of time as we can.
Yeah, it's Arsenal Pass for when we started it for me and Brendan was about get great information out there in a condensed format so that people can take something away with them and have some action points to go and work on with their game or try and hit those level ups. Whereas Time in the Round is a lot more about the game itself and how we approach it, how to be honest, anything. So it's something that we're going to look to continue with in the future.
Yeah, and I also want to touch upon future plans for that because I had a lot of people reach out to me and kind of it was like their favorite episode and all this kind of stuff. So not what we were really expecting. Like we didn't have too many plans for it when we just kind of uploaded it. So right now we're not sure. I don't know if it'll be a YouTube exclusive or if we'll throw it on. I think there's pretty much a 0% chance it'll go on if you're listening on Spotify or Podbean, if it'll go under like the same channel as this podcast. It would probably be its own if we put it on those mediums. But currently, no plans. We'll probably kind of keep doing it weekly, but not hard commit like this one, and just go with it and see what it develops into.
Mm-hmm. As well, if you are on the channel, you know that we've been doing some deck techs. We had our chain class constructed go up a couple of weeks ago, and last week, me and Brendan sat down and Brendan talked us through his Kano deck that he's been playing through the skirmish season to some pretty good results. I know you've got a lot of games in with Kano now. You're basically an expert. Another reason we wanted to start with Wizard this week with the class sort of deep dives. So yeah, go check that out if you're still looking for some Blitz information on Kano or maybe a deck to take to just armories, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I think people listening that haven't seen it yet, I think you'd be pretty shocked by the list that I've ended up on in Blitz. I felt like I had to adapt to a very fast format after Monarch, and also a lot of decks kind of teching in things to specifically target Wizard, that being Double Razor Reflex, Double Sigil. But anyway, if you're more interested in that, definitely go check out the video. Let me know what you think. And I can't imagine that you won't be surprised at one of the kind of key cards actually cut from my deck. But with that said, speaking of kind of deck techs and gameplay, we do have another gameplay video going up at Channel Fireball. It's going to be Blitz, and it's Bolton versus Prism. So an interesting match. I think we don't see very much kind of out in the wild, I'd say. So we not in Gauntlet or anything like that. I was on the Prism side. Hayden was on the Bolton side. Let us know what you guys think. I'm also interested to hear if you want to comment on this video, if you want to see more classic constructed, content from us, or the Blitz stuff is still interesting to you. We're in the mindset that maybe it's time to kind of fully switch to classic.
Yep. I think that's kind of where we're at. So that's probably our plans unless we hear otherwise. Again, as well, if you are on channelfireball.com, looking at any of the content or heading over to the shop, we do have an affiliate code as well. So that's just Arsenal Pass. Just one word. Just chuck that in. Gives us a little bit of a kickback and lets us keep doing what we're doing. So if you're over there, then please do that. yeah, otherwise, other content, we don't really, our show, we're not big on shout outs or anything, Brennan, but I did want to just plug a little thing that I saw from some other content in the past week. I try and listen to some of the other podcasts that are out there, and there's some great podcasts. And the Attack Action podcast had a really great episode on deck building, which I think is, if you're new to deck building or you're maybe struggling for getting a process for deck building, I think go and check those guys out. Their last episode is a bit of a great resource for that, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say the most hated line in all of YouTube. But if you are interested in our content and you do like deck techs and all these extra stuff that we throw on YouTube, if you guys could, throw a subscribe, throw a like, turn on that notification bell, as they say. No, but if you guys want to subscribe and like, it does help us out a lot and does encourage us to keep doing these kind of extracurricular videos like deck techs on Shane or Kano, and just kind of more targeted information for you guys on those channels. But yeah, Hayden, are we? Is it time for the Command and Cookout?
Yeah, turn on the grill, Brendan. Let's do it.
Yeah, turn on the grill. Pack up your Vegemite. It's time to go Command and Cookout.
All right, so listener question this week. We had a sort of a late question come through, which I think is actually just a fantastic question. So I did already kind of explain a little bit of this to Brendan, because this is from. So first of all, this is from Adam Grabowski. Thank you for the question, Adam. Adam sends us quite a long email just detailing his history as a long time TCG player of Magic and digital TCGs like Hearthstone as well. So thank you for that background. And Brendan, Adam is talking about data analysis and the fact that in other games we have big data, right? So you think about games like MTG, where there's big data, there's people analyzing that data and trying to find the best sets of cards or best cards for certain decks at any given time. So Adam thankfully sort of did a too long didn't read a question for us. So his question is, since Flesh and Blood is still in early stages compared to other TCGs, how do you feel about the way deck building and meta developments happen without tons of data to drive decisions? Do you think it's more fun to just try and do the best we can with the relatively little info we have? Or do you think it would be cooler to get as close to a solved meta as we could before the next set releases? And then just before we jump into that, Brendan, he says, sorry again for the long message, and he's been excited by the game so far. And keep up the awesome work on the pod.
Yeah, so to answer this question, I want to talk about Hearthstone. So I played Hearthstone back when it came out, in like the early days of Classic and stuff like that. There wasn't a lot of data. And back then you would kind of, you go look at the streamer, see what, somebody else was running, see what kind of tech cards they were throwing in. And I think with like the new, like they re-released Classic and Hearthstone, I don't know how many, it's like extra, many years later, we kind of realized like a lot of the decks that were ran back then that were like top tier decks were really bad after, it did go into HS replay and get this big data, kind of millions of data points that they analyzed and kind of determine the power of a card. And yeah, I would say Hearthstone, like that's just the one I like to look at because that game got progressively like less fun for me. They have tweaked it nowadays where they will kind of quickly adjust cards, ban cards, do all this stuff that they were going to do. There was a long stretch where they would release the cards and just leave them released. And then the format would get solved in like a day or a week or 2 weeks. And I found that so boring. Like, to be honest, that's honestly what turned me off to Hearthstone in the end. But yeah, I think that in Flesh and Blood, we won't ever have that data unless something fundamentally changes about, the core tenet of the game, which is that it's supposed to be played in the Flesh and Blood. We're always going to be working with really, really bad data, which if you're in like a hardcore testing group, maybe you'll have like 1,000 games or, maybe a couple thousand games recorded in a spreadsheet. But the data, that compared to millions of data points, which are analyzed by, some sort of machine learning algorithm is just nothing, right? It's all nuanced. It's kind of anecdotal. So we just stay in this perpetual unsolved meta. I think it's awesome. It's like the funnest part about it. It's like one of the funnest parts about playing this game competitively. Because if you go to any pro event, any event where you actually just really want to win, now there's always a threat to just break the format and beat everyone, always. And that's something that you're going to have to consider as a competitor not doing that as well. So if I'm going to show up to the Vegas calling, let's just pull the current constructed meta and just extrapolate, right? Like I know like it's going to be like very heavy Shane. There's going to be a lot of Bravos trying to target the Shane, all stuff. And then I also have to think like someone might just beat a deck that just beats Bravo and Shane, and it's not even close. It's like a 95%, and it's like maybe it's a deck that I can beat after I've gotten some reps in and I change my game plan, but on first kind of meeting it, I'll just lose. And that's always a threat with Flush and Blood. I think that's something that makes it really, really fun as a competitive player and someone putting time into the game. What about you, Hayden?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things that has just drawn me in so deeply to Flesh and Blood is this ability to theorycraft and to adapt and develop decks as a metagame goes along. And so far, yeah, the metagame has developed slowly. I think that'll speed up. But to your point, we won't get these huge sort of, semi-solved or solved metas from day 1, day 2, day 3. We're going to see an adaptive meta happen. And also, I do think that this game does lend itself to not being able to be as solved as other games because of the way cards work with the multifunctional purpose of cards and the way that you in a game you start full and come down. So that's really important for me, I think, and it's something that what keeps me, I guess, playing this game and being excited about it is the fact that I can go and play an event, see something happen in an event, a metagame develop, go away and try and iterate on that or come up with a way to attack that format in a certain way based on the card pool that we have. So yeah, and just to point out as well, Adam agrees. He says, he loves it and he feels like it's the Wild West compared to other TCGs when there's such a highly unoptimized environment.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's like the confines of the game force us to stay in like a sort of prehistoric state compared to other games that online TCGs, even Magic now because they have their Magic Moto or Arena or whatever.
Yeah.
So now we're kind of just always going to be in this paper phase and just this really it's nothing compared, right?
Yeah, I think we do get to. So you think about Magic. I hate to talk about Magic a lot, but you think about Magic pre the digital age, especially the Arena age. So even when you had Magic Online, the amount of data out there was growing, but it wasn't as much. Once you get to Arena, you're seeing formats solved like day 1, day 2, day 3, and then bannings need to start happening because they need to rebalance format, things like that. We're not going to get to that point, but where we might get to is that sort of early days of a Magic Online kind of style where there's big teams coming together and testing. There's analytical minds in the community and in the content creator circle trying to drive data points and get things out there. So I wouldn't be surprised to see us get to that point probably, fairly soon as well.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Adam, for the question. And again, if you do want to email a question into us, that's arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. We'll drop the email down below in the description, or you can just drop us a comment on the video and let us know what your question is. We'll chuck in another question for next week. All right, Brendan, we introduced it in the title of the show. Let's jump straight into our first ever class deep dive with Wizard. And where are we going to start, Brendan?
Yeah, so if we're talking about Wizard, we got to talk about Kano. Currently, there's only one Wizard in Flesh and Blood, and that is Kano. So I'm just going to go ahead and read off the hero text. So Kano says, instant, 3 resources. Look at the top card of your deck. If it's a non-attack action card, you may banish it. If you do, you may play it this turn as though it were an instant. So what does this mean, Hayden? Like, that's the question. I remember when Kano was spoiled, it was like we take for granted what we understand about Wizard now and the play patterns and kind of when you want to play on your opponent's turn, when you want to play on your turn. But just looking at this face up, it's like, what does this mean in a vacuum, right? And that means that you can kind of come off the top of your deck and you can play at instant speed, right? So you can respond to your opponent, play on their turn, you can play on your turn. I think it lends you to a very sort of dynamic gameplay because of that. And it's not the only deck that you can have instants in, but it is the only hero that can kind of switch the dynamic of Flesh and Blood, where it's player's turn, all this kind of standard blocking and stuff like that. It more just flips the game on its head. Has these large points of arcane damage, which makes your opponent's defense value on those cards irrelevant. Instead, makes their resource base the only way to block, as well as their armor loadout. So yeah, Wizard just as a fundamental is sort of like an asymmetrically designed class that can play on both turns of the game in any turn cycle.
Yeah, and if you look at it about what is Kano's, I guess, points of influence or power, is the fact that one of the key ones is that you can play multiple actions without extra action points on a turn because of this ability to play off the top. And yes, that costs, of course, but extra action points always cost. So it's something that's, while you can do that, and some of the classes with specific cards, whether it be something like a lead the charge or scabskin leathers off your brute, Kano can do this any day of the week, basically, off the top, and you have this flexibility to do it. So it becomes such a complex hero from that standpoint, because now not only are you playing with those 4 cards or 4+1, you're now playing with whatever that card might be on top of your deck.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I just want to talk a little bit about the history of Wizard, because it's actually quite funny. Arcane Rising released, obviously, when we saw Wizard coming out of Welcome to Wraith, it was just like, it was the epitome of mind-blowing. It's like, oh, there's this like damage that can't be blocked. Okay, so there's this armor where you can block with it, but you need resources. And I don't know, it was just so weird. And I remember that the general consensus, like, and trust me, don't take too much from this, but like the general kind of Facebook consensus that was very critical of cards and class design was like, oh, this class sucks. It's so bad, all of that. And the reason I bring this up is because one of the developers, Chris Gehring, actually commented on one of these posts, which I don't know if they'll be too happy with me mentioning. I don't know if it's been deleted or whatever, if it's still kind of out there. Yeah, it's still out there. But he actually, I remember it was like some high level players like, no, this class can't do anything. He was like, you guys are just bad. You don't understand what this class can do. And I was like, oh, wow. Because like as soon as I saw it, I was like, the power level of Kano, when you see it, you're like, okay, the theoretical power level of this deck is just incredibly high. It's, so much less linear than other decks where you just kind of play out these attack actions, have these, attack values that are very predictable. Kano's kind of the opposite of that, where it's much, much less predictable. I remember when I saw that, I was like, okay, yeah, Kano's definitely, while it doesn't make sense now, it's definitely the deck to crack. But then COVID happened, so I don't think anybody cracked Kano.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that hero starts on 30 life and constructed and 15 life in Blitz, or like in limited for the young hero. Like, there's a significant power there.
It's a signpost to the power, right? Like, it being at 15 life and 30 life and constructed, 15 life and Blitz, really shows you that the potential power of the deck is incredibly high, because that is, like, you're losing 25% of your life total in constructed. That's a huge cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're going to probably dive into a little bit about how, of course, in fact, we're definitely going to dive into how you play this class and some of the key ways that you can actually utilize the power of this class. But I think suffice to say, my kind of top line headline is snowballing some effects is pretty strong as well.
All right, so I know I said that, Kano was the only wizard, but that is technically not true, or so it's rumored. So there is actually rumored to be another wizard that is printed, and it's called James the Creator. So it's an ode to James White, and the text box reads, if you can name the cards in your deck in perfect order, I think it's at any time, you win the game.
Rumored text box.
Yeah, rumored text box, rumored. Cannot confirm or deny, but pretty funny, right? And it just shows you. I know that I actually spoke to James back in 2019, or like it was early 2020. He had told me that Wizard was his favorite class, and but it's pretty funny. Hayden, do you know how to play the James the Creator hero and win the game very easily?
I do now. I thought it was illegal, but you can tell everyone.
60 crack baubles, baby. Easy clap.
No, it's gotta be 59 plus 1 card just to really test your mettle.
Oh god, that would be horrible. But yeah, so let's just talk a little bit about we're gonna take a base level look at Kano before we get into its matchups, how to play it, turn cycles, all the more complicated stuff. So we're just gonna kind of roll through some cards here.
Way to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we got to start with Crucible of the Aether Wave. This is the weapon. You see this played, like 99% of the time. Other options are Talshar out of Crucible or the Aether Conduit also out of Crucible. But, Crucible of Aether Wave is a really, really key card. It makes it so cards like Sonic Boom, Lessons in Lava, these Majestics or supers that Kano has be able to hit, right? Because Null Rune 3 is really standard. Null Rune 4 is less standard. And we'll talk a little bit more about strategies to beat Null Rune 4 in the future. But Crucible the Aether, really key card and really important on a lot of his abilities. And I think we have to, we obviously have to mention the Stormstriders, the kind of marquee equipment of Kano. They basically allow you to play on your opponent's turn, right?
I can mention it. I think this is one of the most, if not the most important card that Wizard has at its disposal. I think this is what generates the power that you're able to. I mean, certainly in Blitz, but even in Classic Constructed, this card is very powerful.
Mm-hmm. Allows you to, for a resource, you can break it at instant speed and makes your next non-attack action card an instant. We see this very common as a way in Blitz to kind of, obviously, and I think in CC as well, this is sort of your kill card. You activate this, and then you play out your big combo that's either unblockable or they've overextended to you and have no resources, and then you just kill them on their turn instead of your turn.
Yeah, and there's a few different sort of variations on the way you can use Stormstriders. You can in fact use Stormstriders pretty significantly in your turn as well. But what this kind of does, basically, using you, if you think about it from a high level, you start on 25% less health, as you said, but you have a card that you can present damage on your turn, take cards out of your opponent's hand, and then on their turn, once you've drawn back up, present damage. So effectively, there's an opportunity for you to present 25% of their health on their turn unblockable. So that's kind of where I see Stormstriders fitting into the whole Wizard, narrative overall.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, just want to cycle, kind of move right into Blazing Ether, which I think is Kano's worst card and his best card. It's a theoretical it's got to be the theoretical most powerful card of the deck, right? Kano specialization, only at red, but it does block for 3. And it says deal X arcane damage to target hero, where X is the amount of arcane damage you have dealt this turn. Really important to note that this, if you use this for something like Aether Flare, which bumps your next attack by X, whatever Aether Flare hit, it's essentially double in Blazing Ether. And Blazing Ether into Blazing Ether is the way you kind of OTK people, hit them for 40-something damage in Blitz. But yeah, Hayden, what do you think of Blazing Ether?
It's such an interesting card. So when Wizard or Kano first came out, Blazing Ether was a way that a lot of people were looking at, okay, is this the first true combo deck in this game? So people were looking at ways to, set up this OTK. That was the big kind of popular thing with like time stamp potions. Some people were even using cards like Index to try and get through their deck and set this up. Ultimately, I think it proved too difficult for players to get there with just the 30 health to be able to survive to that point to set up the OTK against a lot of more aggressive decks like Ninja and even the Dash decks at the time were starting to become more aggressive. So in saying that though, the way that we started to see Blazing Ether utilized a lot more was as not so much a piece of a larger, huge sort of OTK combo, but as a way to, pair with certain, maybe 1 or 2 cards to push damage and find kills. And it's actually a card you can utilize well with Stormstriders as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Blazing Ether is kind of the card that demands respect as Kano, right? If someone wants to, a legitimate strategy against Kano, especially in Blitz, is just to play out your whole hand, go as aggressive as possible. Their deck may not feed them what they need, but they could also, hit you for a lot of damage using, using something off the top, like a Lessons in Lava, fetch the Blazing, then Kano the Blazing, or have the Blazing in Arsenal and go ahead and boots Blazing when they need. And so, we're going to talk a lot about the kind of these combos, but a big one for Blazing Ether, which Hayden mentioned, he talked about using the boots on your turn. A lot of times when you use the boots on your turn, it's going to be to do Blazing Ether. So if you have Blazing Ether in Arsenal, let's say you play a Stir Forked out of hand, you have 2 blues, you come in for 14 damage, and your opponent's like, I got all reds. I mean, there's no way to effectively block this. So no blocks. All right, boots, Blazing, 14 damage, right? So you have 28 damage turn. When it's in the Arsenal, if you have the boots up, it's always a threat that they can just get hit for massive damage. I think it's a card that a lot of people fear on the other side of the board.
Yeah, it's a card that a lot of people fear on both sides of the board because your opponent's fearing the damage it's going to do, and you're fearing drawing that card and having a red in your hand. It's such an interesting card. But one thing you'll notice as we go through the cards in Wizard is there's not many red line cards from the Super Majestic range. A lot of them are yellow. There's some blues in their effect. So the power of these cards is really up there on these reds. There's a reason these are red line cards. It's important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think talking about yellow ones, naturally kind of pushes us into Sonic Boom, which is my favorite card to play. Like
Same.
this is for me, this is the funnest card to play. What Sonic Boom says, it says, deal 3 damage to target opposing hero. You're pretty much gonna universally use this with the Crucible to bump it to 4. If Sonic Boom hits, you get to look at the top card, and if it's a non-attack, you get to play it. It also gets discounted forever for how much Sonic Boom hit. So even a lot of times you'll be playing out the Sonic Boom just to chip in for 1, and then you just find some absolute gas off the top, and you find that Voltic Bolt, and you're able, like a core part of Kano is doing something called double spelling. If you're able to consistently double spell on your turn, whether that's you Kanoing and finding it off the top and playing one out of hand, if you did that every single turn, you would never lose a game. Basically, it's pretty much the most powerful thing you could do as a wizard player.
Yeah, and it also forces your opponent to make tough decisions, whether they block this. And a lot of people in most formats now, you see Arcane 3 is kind of the way that people want to play against Wizard. So even forcing through that 1 damage, you're still threatening to double spell, right? Even if the first one is only for 1 damage, you've actually taken a card from their hand, which is still important.
Yeah. And next I want to talk about Forked Lightning. This is the card that you're usually going to kill your opponent with. This combined with Stir of the Ether Winds or pretty much any pump effect is how you create an amount of damage that no matter how many cards your opponent could have 1 million cards in hand, right? They still can't block it. And we'll talk about more complicated sort of concepts as a wizard player, like life thresholds, right? So an example would be if your opponent's running Norwood 3, if they have 11 health, then they're essentially dead on board as soon as you draw Stir Forked with the resources that you can Crucible and Metacarpus Note it, because that will come in 14 and is completely unblockable. I think this is more of a predictable play pattern at this point, but it's a scary thing being on the other side of the board, just saying as soon as I go go to 11 or lower, I'm essentially dead. If the right things come off the top of the deck, where they do have that Forked in Arsenal or that Stir, and just get the resources they need plus the other card to go with it, I'm just dead, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, and another, I think you said that's kind of the base level, but there's so many other powerful things you can do with Forked Lightning, because each amplification is doubled effectively because of the wording on the deal 2 arcane damage. So a card like Aether Flare, for instance, which is one of my other favorite cards, probably just behind Sonic Boom, is huge with Forked Lightning for that reason. There's some really cool stuff that you can do in like Aether Flare based Kano decks.
Yep, finding Aether Flare off the top, and then using your boots on your opponent's turn to Forked. Definitely done that before for like a solid Forked for 16 or 14.
Yeah.
Totally catch them guard. And honestly, a big reason why I have Aether Flare in a lot of my decks is because it's so dangerous when combined with like a Forked Lightning. It could just kill your opponent pretty much out of nowhere. Forked Lightning and Blazing, both just ridiculously powerful with Aether Flare. But kind of circling into the last sort of attack attack for Kano at the Majestic spot, it is going to be Lessons in Lava. This card is really interesting. Basically, if it hits, you're able to search your deck for a card that let's say the hit is X, right? So something that costs X or less for what you hit for 1, so you go 1 or 0, etc., etc., etc. And this is a tutor, right? You get to put it on top of your deck. If you have the resources, you can Kano it off and play it. Very, very versatile card.
Yeah. Every class has a tutor. So far, Inflection Blood and Lessons in Lava is a pretty powerful one. Again, at yellow, so it has some flexibility as well. You can really do some pretty crazy stuff with Lessons in Lava if your opponent lets you, get it off. You think if you hit for full 4, they decide they want to take the damage, you can go find a Blazing, and you're already presenting, a 3-card hand for 8, for instance. So, and it's just without doing anything else, and you can actually start to iterate and do some pretty powerful things. And one card that's pretty popular to go and find is probably the next card we're going to talk about, Brendan.
Yep, and that's going to be Tome of the Aether Wind. This is the final sort of Majestic Super we have from Arcane Rising. This card is really interesting because obviously it's in the Tome cycle. It does block for 2. It is red. It's a 0 cost. And it has 2. You can choose from 2. So you can either you get to pick 2. Sorry, you can choose both of them. You can either draw a card, or the next effect that you have that deals arcane damage instead deals that much +1. So Hayden, what is the correct mode to choose when you play Tome of the Aether Wind?
Who knows? It depends, right?
It's all context.
Yeah, it's all contextual. I think one thing I would say about Tome of the Aether Wind is I think this card is underutilized as a amplification spell. So I would say that 85% of the time when I've seen this card being played, it's to draw 2 cards, and I think often that's incorrect, or the way that you could actually build your deck to have this card in it is that there's a lot of power in giving that amplification. The cards we already talked about, Fork Lightning, Sonic Boom, Aether Flare. Like there's cards that can really benefit from that second tome ability, or sorry, the first part of that text on that card. So
Snapback, baby.
yeah, snapback, exactly. There's so many things. So
yeah, you got your budget Voltic Bolt. So like a big part of, I know we're going to talk about both constructed formats, but a big part of Blitz is basically poking your opponent down until you get them to one of those life thresholds, like we talked about, to 11 or something lower than that. Obviously, lower the better. So a lot of the ways you do that is just playing that Voltic Bolts with Crucible. But you only have 2 in your deck, and then you have Aether Spindle, which is kind of not as much as a poke. So you can, if you have Tome of the Aether One and a snapback, you can snap back for 6, which is it's a budget Voltipole when you need, and your opponent's likely going to be taking 3 damage at that point. So really, really strong card. Hayden, in terms of the commons that we got in Arcane Rising, what's the biggest standout for you?
Yeah, well, I might talk about the two rares first. Well, in fact, there's three rares, but I'm gonna
forget about one of them because I've literally never seen it on the board.
Absorbent Ether. So the defense reaction was a defense reaction that costs 1 at red, defense of 4, and gives +2 to your next arcane damage. I have seen that card. I think there is some wizard players, devout wizard players who have used this card, especially in Blitz and Iron metas. I think it's pretty specific. There might be more to it, but for the moment, the cards I want to talk about are Aether Spindle and Stir the Aether Winds. I'm going to start with Stir because we've talked about that card already and how it works in conjunction with Fork Lightning. But that card has so much implications. Basically, and I said it at the start, that sort of headline for me is Snowball. And I'm not sure it's maybe the right term, but it's something that kind of sticks in my mind, is that as you add damage, so additive is maybe a better term, but as you add damage up in a turn, that continues across, that carries across. So cards like Aether Flare, for instance, is huge for that. You can stir an Aether Flare, get it to 7. You're presenting 7 damage plus potentially another 7 more. Whatever they don't block is probably coming back at them for double effectively. So Stir the Aether Winds just has so much ability to help that. And because it lets you cast the next card at instant speed, that 3 buff is inbuilt, right?
Nothing better off the top as well. We'll talk about when to play, when not to play on your opponent's turn, because I think that is the biggest mistake Kanos make. But if you do play on your opponent's turn and you are going blind off the top, which is, spoiler alert, not too often if you're effectively playing Kano, if you find Stir the Aether Winds, happy birthday. That's as good as it gets.
Yeah, it's effectively a free action point, right? Because you play it off the top. It doesn't cost you to play anything the Stir the first time. You're playing the next card at instant speed, and you still have your action point. Which is massive. Let's talk about Aether Spindle. I think this card is a really interesting ability. One thing I want to note about Arcane Rising in general is that the wizard cards are pretty base level, right? They either deal damage, add damage, or allow you to manipulate the deck slightly. But that manipulation is very... It's got prerequisites on it. So Aether Spindle, for instance, is at red, 2 cost, deal 4 damage to target opposing hero, and then opt X, where X is the damage dealt. So in order to opt and be able to start to try and set up the top of that deck, you have to deal some damage. One of my favorite things with Aether Spindle is, you can get this to 5. If your opponent just tanks that damage to try and come back on their turn, you get to basically stack your next hand. So if you find 5 cards that are reasonable, you can stack the top card as well and know your 5-card hand that you're playing into effectively. Or you can actually just get rid of trash cards and look to set up. Maybe you'll probably block out on your turn.
Yeah, Aether Spindle is a card that is, it hasn't, so in Blitz, for instance, it's very common to be a poke card. So you are going to get the opt 2, but more importantly, your opponent's going to leak 2 damage. There is another use for Aether Spindle, which I think that we don't see a lot, which is one of my favorite things to do. A lot of times I'm going to, in games, I'm going to be parking a Stir in my arsenal. This is a very powerful card, very modular card that you can use in a lot of situations. And, like we talked about, the kill combo. But say I have a Stir in my arsenal and I drew an Aether Spindle in hand, and my opponent just decides to go all in. They're like, I'm going to present, let's just say like 13 damage. I'm on 15. Honestly, I'm probably just going to smack them with an Aether Spindle. I'm going to pop my boots, smack them with Aether Spindle for 9 or something, and then I'm going to opt 9 cards in my deck. They're dead. Like, I have to get so unlucky for them not to be dead, because I'm just going to fix my deck, draw my 4 blues, Kano, and it's just so explosive. I actually did this in a tournament recently, the Red Riot tournament, which was streamed, and I was on stream for this match against a Warrior player, hit him with an Aether Spindle for 9. So, and I think actually that game... I ended up opting 8 cards to the bottom of my deck. It was the most I've ever just like kind of looked at the top. I remember I think the Aether Spindle hit for like 7 or something. I looked at 7 and it was 1 blue and 6 reds. I was like, what the heck is this? So really interesting card. And I think that using it to punish your opponent when they go too deep on you, even for 5, like even if you hit them for 5, say they present a lot of damage to you, you KO it off the top, you Crucible it, hit them for 5 when they have no resources. The damage you can do when you have 4 blues into the top of your deck is a lot.
Yeah, and late game, you just kind of talked about that play for Aether Spindle, Boots, Stir, Aether Spindle. That's one of my favorite plays late game when you know that you have a Blazing somewhere near the top. That can actually just be lights out. Like if they come in, you can just be unblockable 18 damage because they have no cards to block with. So it's a pretty good kill condition. Commons, so just a couple I want to talk about. We've already talked about Aether Flare a lot. So Aether Flare is the 1 cost at red, deal 3 damage, and then your next card you play this turn with an effect that deals arcane damage gets that additive damage that you've just dealt this turn. So Aether Flare is just a card that can really just propel you forward, and you can just have these big 5-card hands, and really forces your opponent to either be able to adapt to their game plan, or you're just going to punish them so heavily for it. Anything else you want to say on Aether Flare, Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, Aether Flare, I think that you want to keep this card in mind in terms of if you do play it in your deck, let's say for a mode like Blitz, this is going to be a card that lets you steal a game a lot when you have no business winning. There are other cards like that, like Sonic Boom. Just a quick note about Sonic Boom. If you're ever looking at a game of Wizard where it looks astronomically unlikely that they're going to win the game, and there's no line that you can think of with how they win, that point 1 always involves a Sonic Boom chain.
Yeah,
it always does, because it just throws everything off and does the crazy stuff. Aether Flare as well. I mean, Aether Flare combined with Blazing Ether is just absolutely devastating. And yeah, it's a great card. Like we talked about the Forked Lightning. Yeah, one of my favorite commons. I run 2 in Blitz, which is pretty uncommon. But if I'm running Talismanic Lens and 2 Cindering Foresights, and I have, with the Eye, and I have almost 10 opt in my deck, yeah, I mean, Aether Flare is pretty good in that situation.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a question from Adam about the lack of unoptimization in formats, and it's so true, right? Like we don't know what the best way to build Wizard is, and to be fair, Wizard decks haven't had success so far, and they are more complicated to build and play. But I think we're starting to see some cards that were maybe underappreciated initially, like an Aether Flare, really start to have their day in the sun a little bit. I want to talk about Reverberate. It's a card that I really like. I think it's a good way to punish aggro decks. Lets you double spell. So Reverberate is at red 1, deal 3 damage, and then you can play a card from your hand, a Wizard non-attack action card from your hand with cost less, equal less than damage you just dealt. So Reverberate is just a fantastic card for being able to do those double spell effects. I also wanted to share it. You talked about Sonic Boom. I just want to quickly share. I remember a game I played against the one and only Sasha Markovic, who dumpstered me with Sonic Boom into Sonic Boom off the top.
Yeah, I mean, that
brutal.
Sasha never needed to be good because he was always lucky, right? But Reverberate is a really interesting card, and I don't run it in my Blitz deck, but that's because if you play Reverberate, I think you need the package as well. Like there's a package that goes well with it where you pull off the double spell. So 90% of your time, your Reverberate is going to hit for 1. So how do you abuse that? Tome of the Eighth Wind, really good. So if I'm running Reverberate in my deck, I'm definitely running Tome, but also things like, I remember I played around with a deck. I called it Uncle Reno, just like Red Kano. It's like that, that uncle at the Christmas party that talks too much. That's Uncle Reno. But, you play the Reverberates and you play the Scalding Rains and the Zaps, and your whole entire mode is to, you're not like, there's these really important damage thresholds as Kano when you're trying to actually take an opponent's life total down, which is like anything more than 3, right? Because they have no more than 3. So if you play against an Ira, and you have this like kind of more redliner deck, I think it was running like 18 blues or 16 blues, but it had like the Scalding Rains, the Zaps. You're just double spelling every single turn and basically ripping cards out of their hand. And you're also putting all the blues on the bottom of their deck, which is a serious opportunity cost because that deck only has, a limited resource, kind of a limited amount of blues. And if, let's say they draw really hot, and you play out a Scalding Rain and a Zap on the same turn because you cannon them off the top and it only leaks 1 damage, but they put 2 blues on the bottom, eventually it just becomes ever more likely to draw the reds because we're never getting back to the pitch. So I think it's super, super interesting. If you're going to play Reverberate, you need the correct we're talking about Blitz here too. In Classic, I think it's just kind of a staple. But if you're going to play it in Blitz, you need the package to go with it. You need the punish to come out of hand, right? To let you play that card in double spells. So the zaps or the scalding rains, or these one costs, right, that are going to do damage.
Yeah. I think it's in Class Constructor, as you say, you can be selective about the matchups you want to play it into. So, matchups where you expect your opponent to try, you have high blue counts, have the ability to prevent a lot of arcane damage. It's not a card you want as much. So, last card I wanted to talk about, I think we can't go anywhere else without talking about from Arcane Rising, Voltic Bolt. It's just super efficient. Effectively, 2 for, or a blue card to deal 6 damage on your turn with Crucible is huge. It's just damage, right?
Yep, this is how you poke. It's also a kill combo with Stir. So with Stir, you can get this up to 10 with Metacarpus Noted Crucible. So your opponent, we talk about life thresholds. If you know you have no more Forked Lightnings in the deck, but you do have the Stir and Arsenal, so you're like, okay, I've got an out through Voltic Bolt, and they just need to be a 7 or less, and then I have them dead. And there's nothing they can do about it if I'm confident they don't have the Sigil, right? So Voltic Bolt is a great way to close games, but its primary mode is just going to be your vanilla poke. Your vanilla poke. You're going to be playing for 6. Your opponent's going to take 3. You rip the blue, and this is about as staple and as baseline as it gets. I mean, I think every single deck, every single Wizard deck would probably play Voltic Bolt.
Yep. All right, let's move through to the Crucible cards and start with one of the biggest upgrades that Wizard got coming to Crucible of War, Metacarpus Nodes. Brendan, tell us about Metacarpus Nodes.
Yeah, Metacarpus Nodes is nuts. Obviously, with Forked Lightning, like that's like the huge one, right? Like you get another kind of Crucible on demand. But you can also use this in other ways. Like say you're going wide, you can activate Metacarpus Nodes multiple times on each attack where you hit your opponent. It also doesn't destroy until the end of your turn, something super important if you're playing in the mirror. So you do maintain that arcane barrier while you're using Metacarpus Nodes, which is really, really interesting. But I do want to touch upon Crucible of War just in general. So Crucible of War, it's a supplementary set. So when you look at the cards that come out of a supplementary set that are provided to the Wizard class, you have to think like it's almost like you're a conspiracy theorist, right? And like you got to look at this and be like, what is LSS trying to tell me, right? Like, what is the secret here? Because they give us these really, really powerful and sometimes super niche cards. So like we also got a card like Aether Conduit out of Crucible of War, which is it's another weapon. It's a 2-hander. It's once per turn action, 2 resources, deal 2 arcane damage to target hero. In our current understanding of like Blitz and Constructed, it's like it's really hard to imagine a scenario where you play that card, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like there's something that card is built for a deck. It's built for a shell where it just excels. But I have no idea what it is. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I agree. To be honest, pretty quickly set aside Aether Conduit. Just didn't have the, capacity to work on something like that at the time. But I'd love to see someone get there and work it out. Maybe it's more meta specific that we see an Aether Conduit shell. I did want to, you just talking about Crucible high level, and I wanted to say as well, when we talked about Arcane, I said, it was pretty clear what the Wizard was trying to do in Arcane Rising. You had arcane damage, you had ways to manipulate the deck, but they had prerequisites. Whereas in Crucible, there's so many interesting cards, and we're going to get into them, but they're a lot more, they're really pushing the synergy and really telling you, hey, this is how you should set up your deck and look to play turns, and this is how you can get the most out of these cards. So, in saying that, Brennan, why don't we start with one of those cards, Chain Lightning?
Yeah, so actually both of the outside of one, which we'll talk about after, both Majestics that were provided to us outside of Metacarpus Nodes are just almost absolute staples. So first is Chain Lightning. Says you may play the next Wizard non-attack action card. This turn is over as an instant. So super, super important because it says it doesn't specify in the hand. Reverberate specifies that it has to be out of hand. So you can't like rip Reverberate off the top and then play your Blazing out of Arsenal. This you can. You get this off the top. If you have the Blazing in Arsenal, you're good to go with this. But it also says if you've played a Wizard non-attack action card this turn already, deal 3 damage to each opposing hero. Really important to note that with this card, there's an interaction with another Crucible card called Snapback, where you can play Chain Lightning, hold priority, play the Snapback, and your Snapback will resolve first, and the Chain Lightning will still get the +3.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and you said that actually with Gaze the Ages, this interaction with instant speed and using the chain to your advantage by holding priority to get the most out of things. And you can actually do that there's a few other plays you can make with Wizard where you involve holding priority and just getting the most out of some of your interactions with cards or your ops, things like that. Yeah, Chain Lightning is a card that, I think there's a lot of power there. There's some really cool things you can do. It allows you to utilize 5-card hands. It allows you to put pressure on the opponent. Even if they block out the damage from Chain Lightning, it's kind of incidental because you've already gotten the effect to play something else afterwards. It's not like Reverberate where you have to deal the damage.
It's funny, and I think this is like actually a really interesting anecdote. So if you were to ask me, what's your favorite card / let's say like maybe you could pick 2 cards like in Wizard. For me, it's Stir. Like if I had to pick one, it's Stir, and if I had to pick 2, it's Stir Forked because I end 80% of my games with a Stir Fork that's unblockable. This is not consistent at all. For instance, I have a friend called named Mike who plays Wizard, and he goes off the top way more than I do. His deck is way heavier blue, and I asked him, I was like he told me, Chain Lightning is my favorite card in the deck. It's the most powerful card because he's going off the top, right? If you go off the top, Chain Lightning is nuts because now you're playing out of hand, it's dealing the 3 damage. Like it's an absolutely crazy card. But there's we'll talk about this later too, but there's so many different styles to Wizard. Like Wizard is really a class where your play style will manifest, kind of in how the entire game is played out. There's not these really concise lines. It's like, this is the absolute best way to play the class, right? There's a bunch of different kind of personal choices that you make along the way, because a lot of times you're weighing up risk reward and like, am I going it for you now? Like what's the opportunity cost? How much damage am I taking? And some people have vastly different macro plans, but also vastly different micro plans as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I want to move to Gaze the Ages. So Gaze the Ages is a blue that says Op 2. And if you played another Wizard non-attack action this turn, Gaze the Ages goes back into your hand. So pretty, powerful interaction there. And this card actually does a lot of work. That effectively, there's hands and situations where you can easily set up Gaze the Ages, or even just have Gaze the Ages, whether it come off the top, whatever it might be, and you get free Op 2.
Yep, you can snap back with this, all that good stuff. It is probably the most common card that is fetched with Lessons in Lava. So if your Lessons hits for 1, a lot of Wizards will put the Gaze on top. That's if they want to fix their blues, because it is a 0-cost blue that is very it has the most. I don't want to say it's the most modular, right? You have the most choice. You can do the most things with it rather than other blues. And that being said, getting this off the top after you're kind of already going down the line, or if you have another spell kind of right below it, you are able to play this whole priority, and then it comes back to your hand after you opt to. So super, super good card.
Yep. Just going to quickly summarize Aetherize, which is the last Majestic, in a few words. So Aetherize says it's a 1-cost instant, and says negate target instant card with cost 1 or less. And for some reason, it doesn't say this, but in parentheses, it should say target Erina's Prayer or target Eclipse. Not really sure why it doesn't say that.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. This is we talked about, these supplementary set Crucible. It's what are they telling me? Like Aetherize, you really got to put that tinfoil hat on. You're like, what is this card for? Right? Because this card never saw play, from my understanding, or never saw it at a high level. Because for some reason, Wizard as a constructed deck was not played in Arcane Rising and in Crucible War meta to a high level. But we also have to remember that in those metas, we almost had no events because of COVID. So they were largely unexplored. And Aetherize is just a fascinating card because let's say Wizard was the theoretical best deck of those formats. Aetherize is probably a good card in those scenarios, right? It's also good against the Prayer, so cards that will hate out Wizard. And now in Monarch, it's really good against Eclipse and Doomsday and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I want to talk about some of the rares. I think there's some cards where maybe we can just kind of quickly go through them here. One card I think we just probably have to talk about next, because we've already been talking about it, is Snapback. So Brendan, tell us about Snapback outside of what we've already sort of mentioned.
Yeah, so Snapback is the easiest way to double spell on a turn, right? It's deal 3 arcane damage to target hero. If you played another Wizard non-attack action card this turn, you may play Snapback as though it's an instant. This card, I've cut it, I've played it, everything in between. I currently play it because, like I said, if you play the Tome, it can be a budget Voltic when you need. You can also play it in response to Gaze. You can play it, in response to your Voltic Bolt, just to double spell, rip 2 cards out of the opponent's hand. There's this card is so powerful and can do so many different things. A funny little history thing here, by the way, is in the Blitz calling, there was a Wizard player called Jason Long, who actually won his top 8 winning in game with a blue snapback at Arsenal.
Yeah, that was fantastic, actually. That was a very interesting, very close match there between two very good Wizard players, also against Rohan as well. I just wanted to quickly clarify, because we have talked about snapback, and obviously it states on the card how it works. If you've played another Wizard non-attack action turn, you can play it at instant speed. So, if you've already, like you say, play Tome, then you draw this and play it, that's fine. I wanted to just quickly go back to the interaction between Chain Lightning and Gaze the Ages, and just how that works, just in case people aren't as familiar. Just want to explain that really clearly. So, the way the chain works and the way priority works is that you can play a card like Chain Lightning or Gaze the Ages. Those are the two cards in this instance. First, so you play those cards and you're holding priority. So you're putting that card onto the chain. It hasn't yet resolved. So the card hasn't yet resolved. The text isn't active, but you have played a Wizard non-attack action card. And then you play the snapback, which then goes onto the chain. And since it's the top layer of the chain, it's the one that's going to also resolve first. So you play snapback, you deal your damage, and then you allow the chain to continue, and the Chain Lightning or the Gaze the Ages resolves. It sees that you've played a non-attack action, and you get that extra benefit.
Absolutely.
I
want to quickly round out the rest. So there's 2 cards out of Crucible of War at common that we actually never saw really played. This is like sort of a blue, which is Rousing Aether and Foreboding Bolt. I think those are really important cards to keep your eye on when you're thinking about building Kano, because they are in the supplementary set. They, like, LSS is trying to tell us something with the design of them. And currently they've been very underutilized. I don't know how to use them, but I think that there's a deck out there that these cards will be very powerful. But lastly, I want to talk about probably one of my favorite cards in Wizard, which is Cindering Foresight.
You got a lot of favorite cards, Brendan.
Got a lot of favorite cards, favorite class. Everything's my favorite. I'm just all positive vibes. But Cindering Foresight, right? It's just if it's not your turn, you're able to play it at instant speed, and the next card you play with an effect that deals arcane damage deals that much +1, and then it's a cycle, so it's red, yellow, blue, and the red lets you opt 3, so you get the +1, and you also get to opt 3 in your deck. This is one of my favorite cards in Blitz. It's one of the most lethal cards. It's very good versus Command and Conquer, so it's very good against opponents who want to overextend into you and not keep resources up. Lets you go off the top of that deck with a ton of knowledge and also getting the +1. Also, it does let you stir Forked for 16 damage. So, if someone is at too much, they're playing very defensively, you're only able to get them down to 13. You can kill them through their null win 3 with the stir Forked for 16 using Cindering.
I love this card, especially in Class Constructed as well. There's certain matchups where I don't want this card. Where I'm more on that kind of block 2, come back with a Voltage Bolt. We'll talk about that soon. But a card I really enjoy, and another way that you can pair with cards like Aether Flare as well during your opponent's turn to present some pretty significant damage. So yeah, a card that I really like.
Absolutely. So now that we've talked about all the cards, we've kind of brought everybody up to speed on what we're working with. Let's talk about how to build Kano. So there's a very, very traditional build. Let's just talk about Blitz for now, because that's the format everybody's been playing recently, and that's where we see the most Kano right now. So the most popular Kano shell is 18 and 20 blues. It's got a bunch of reds like Voltic Bolt, Aether Flare. These cards are going to poke and try to get your opponent down. And then it's got most Majestics in it, usually. But the most important thing is going to be Stir Fork. That deck usually will just try to Stir Fork the opponent to kill them. It pokes them, and it does Stir Fork for lethal. That being said, the deck is very, very flexible. It can play off the top. It can opt. Has the eye. It will usually run Talismanic Lens. That being said, there are a lot of decks coming out of the Asia Pacific region that are running the Skullcap. But traditionally, we do run the Talismanic Lens to get that opt to fix the top of the deck. But yeah, currently Kano does usually end all of their games with Stir Forked, but has the power to end the game at any time by just going off the top, right?
Yeah, it's a deck that if you look at the way that Kano has traveled through Blitz, it initially started as just a deck that had powerful cards, was able to present significant damage over a course of turns, and at that time when it first was iterated, Blitz was a very young format, so decks weren't super tuned, they weren't super aggressive or super fast. So Kano did have a few turns to sort of get a few sort of pieces together, whether it be the Stir Forked, but also plus something else earlier in the game, whether it be a Stir plus a Voltic Bolt, or it be setting up a Sonic Boom turn, whatever it might be. So But then as we went along, the format started to, I guess, get a bit tougher for Kano. Tall Dorinthia was a real issue for those kind of builds. So then Kano had to adapt and as you say, look to maybe poke a bit more with things like Baltic Bolt. That's probably that build you just talked about. And then now we're even probably in a more interesting position for Kano, where some cards that traditionally really powerful, maybe like a Lessons in Love, it might not be the right choice for the deck.
If you want to know something really funny about Kano, it's that Kano was actually not super successful in season 1, especially in North America and just on international skirmishes. I think it had a couple wins, maybe a few over in New Zealand, Australia, but it was really not a popular deck. I mean, there was Drone Ira, which was dominant. There was Tall Dorinthia, which became very dominant at the end of season 1. So the release of Monarch comes out, and then we have Skirmish season 2. Everything about Monarch release is bad for Kano, right? Drone of Brutality, actually kind of bad for Kano, because now all the Iras run a leg tap. They run the Snapdragon Scalers every single time. They run double Razor, double Sigil. Tall Warriors, the deck has adjusted to have a sort of favorable matchup there. But then everything else out of Monarch, Shane, Prism, Spell Void, all this stuff was just net harder for Kano, just made the format harder. But we look at Skirmish Season 2, Kano's success in the format has only increased. There's more Kano players. Kano's winning more events, all this kind of stuff. And that's why I talk about this. The theoretical power of this deck is so high, but it's just so much more complicated in the lines and, kind of the skill ceiling and like how to play it and play to your outs and win every match, that we only now seeing more Kano players, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it just takes time to get reps in and learn this deck. It's not easy, and the lines aren't obvious. You can have legitimately so many lines because it involves the cards that you arsenal to then prep the future of your deck. It could be playing to certain lines that some people wouldn't even. I've seen some lines that you've played, Brendan, in games we've played, which, to be honest, I'd never thought of playing in Blitz. So, there's people are coming up with more and more lines each time, or more ways to play the deck, and that influences how they build the deck as well.
Yep. And we can't talk about building Kano without talking about GTL Kano, which is Gym Tan Laundry Kano, an ode to the Jersey Show, cultural phenomenon, just piece of gold from our history. But basically, this is a Kano deck that runs attack actions as well as wizard non-attack spells, as we could say. It's going to be running like Rifting. It's going to be running Command and Conquer, E-Strike. It's kind of all over the place. Is it good? Is it bad? I'm going to let you figure it out. But that deck has put up some serious results, and nobody can tell it otherwise. So GTL Kano, or Gym Tan Laundry Kano, the mix of attack actions and spells, is a real deck, and you may run into it. You'll never know.
I wanted to talk about... Yeah, I saw some gameplay of that deck. It was actually pretty phenomenal to watch that play into Ira, and it be very, very close. I think there's one thing about building Kano, especially so we've talked about Blitz, but Classic Constructed, I think, you have these builds that are a bit more adaptive because, of course, you have the sideboard, so you can change how the Kano deck that you have plays from, or the Wizard deck you have plays from match to match, depending on what you're up against. Traditionally, you've got this ability to play a more sort of, like you talked about in Blitz, like poke, set up a big spell here and there. You're playing that especially against sort of, those aggressive and mid-range decks where you might be blocking with 2 cards, presenting a Voltic Bolt for 6, or a Spindle for 5, things like that. And then trying to maybe set up a big sort of 14 damage turn at some point. And then you have this ability to strip a lot of those kind of, I guess I would call them like everyday cards, those kind of fair cards that trade damage out, and really focus on just pure lines of iterative damage, things that really stack up for some big turns. So whether it be like the Stir Forked, there's some really cool stuff you can do with Chain Lightning, Aether Flare. Aether Flare is a card that enables a lot of those kind of big turns as well. So those are kind of the two streams of the deck I see in Classic Constructed, and you can actually play both because of the sideboard opportunity. But I think the one to explore moving forward is that those kind of interactions that we saw in Crucible that came out that we haven't played with as much. Centering Foresight, another card that can deal a lot of damage in those kind of builds.
Absolutely. So now we're going to move into the next section, which is how to play the deck, like how to play Kano, right? So we talked about this already a little bit, but generally in Blitz, how you're going to be playing Kano is you're going to be just poking, and then you're going to get someone, the opponent, to a life threshold that you can sort of kill them or present the damage to them, which is completely unblockable. That being said, the that is a play style that I prefer. And I know plenty of Kanos that prefer to kind of go off the top of the deck, maybe roll the dice a little bit more, and just burn their opponent out just out of nowhere. There are, like, the way you play Kano is really just the level of risk versus reward you want to take. And I think that's why I think a lot of players, when they play against Kano, will think that it's sort of a high roll deck or a lucky deck or all this silliness. But no, there's definitely a way in which you can play Kano and play the wizard class, which makes it very low variance, and you're almost never playing with, sort of unknown information, never just randoming off the top to try to win the game.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the lines of play you can take, you're like the master of your own destiny in so many ways with Kano. It kind of feels, I guess, when you start to pick up this deck, it's like, I don't have that many ways to play this deck. Like, I'm really forced into a corner to try and present damage to my opponent, and it just ends up being that my damage is less. But that's actually not always the case. It's just that you have to recognize these lines that you're playing to, like you're speaking about. So tell us what, I kind of, I guess, already alluded to it when I talked about the chip strategy versus the non-chip strategy. What are you seeing in the ways that those kind of hands and decks play out?
In terms of chip strategy versus non-chip, so non-chip strategy, chip strategy is always going to be, playing out your Voltic Bolt, basically playing out your hand, arsenaling a very strong card. Whether, if it's in the early turns of the game, you're going to arsenal Voltic Bolt just so you can block with It's all about when you're talking about Wizard, you got to talk about the resource of cards in your hand, because you're going to be trying to block with 2 or less cards. When you block with 3 cards, then you got to play out of the arsenal, and that's pretty tough. That being said, like I talked about with the poke strategy, you're almost always ending the game with stir fork. So you play out all your attacks to poke the opponent down. Then as soon as you get a stir, or as soon as you get a fork, you slap it in the arsenal, wait for the other, and you can Kano off the deck if you have all blues, all this kind of stuff. You have the lens, opt, cindering foresight, all that good stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of ways to play out the games, whether you are the chip focused or are burning off the top.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Hayden. I can hear you.
Yeah, I've got a question. You're just talking, and I think there's a great point here is that you talk about the arsenal. So stir forked is one way using the arsenal. How else are you using the arsenal, and how important is the arsenal during games with Kano?
Yeah, arsenals are extremely important. So the arsenal, putting a card in your arsenal is incredibly important. I think as a Kano player, you always want to have a card in the arsenal. Sometimes you don't, because you're going to literally have to be blocking to not die to damage, in which case you're probably looking to, when you end your turn, draw 4 cards that are going to allow you to kill the opponent. That being said, in the early turns of the game, you should always look to arsenal. You should always have an arsenal card. And when you do that, you have to always go through this sort of math where it's like, how much damage am I willing to take in order to only block with 1 card and play out a card in arsenal? Or I block with 3 cards and I have no turn, take up my tunic and put a card in arsenal. And that kind of sucks. You don't really want to be doing that. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of this rotating equation with, like, thing about Kano, and we'll get into this more, is that you're always adapting to your opponent. There is no set game plan. It's, what is my opponent throwing at me? How much damage do I have to take? What can I live on? And what can I get away with, right? Can I get away with only blocking with 1 card? Then I get to play out my Voltic Bolt and arsenal my stir, all this kind of stuff.
We talk about, knowing how you want to win the game. And of course, within that, we just say, there's ways that you're adapting your game plan. There's something we talked about in our sort of 5 tips the previous, or 2 weeks ago now, that you've got to think about that. But Brendan, people are going to say, wait, why don't you have a game plan? How can you not have a game plan with Kano?
Because there are so many game plans. There's so many ways to win. So if you want the 5-minute tip how to win with Kano, I can tell you that if you stir fork the opponent when they're on 11 or less life, you're going to kill them. If you have the resources, which is a whole nother thing, but you can kill them in so many other different ways, because you can just find the damage off the top. And I'm not saying you're Kanoing and just randomly ripping. You can play the Cindering Foresight out of Arsenal. You can Talismanic Lens, all this kind of stuff. Like, you can play Cindering Foresight out of Arsenal, and you can find Aether Flare plus Forked Lightning. And your opponent just tries to present, a ton of damage to you. Say they present 15 damage to you, but you have the tunic, you block with the tunic, Kano, and then you're Aether Flaring and then, Forked Lightning them and killing them. So it's like, what is my opponent doing? How much damage are they presenting to me? How many resources do they have? And the most important thing, if you're playing against Kano or playing as Kano against someone else, is how much information do I have? What do I know about? What do I not know about? If my opponent, the more cards my opponent is holding that I don't know what they are, / arsenal, the harder the game is for me every single time, without a doubt, 100%. So when I see Warrior players play Warriors Valor, Steelblade Supremacy, pitch a card, no Arsenal, and it's like 11 damage. My life is so easy as Kano. I literally can't even put it into words. Where if they had just gone Warriors Valor, pitch a card, hold 2 cards in hand, which may not seem, super irrelevant, but instead they keep up to 2 cards. They make me ask the question, what has he got? And then they put the Arsenal, the Arsenal, the Steelblade Supremacy. That's definitely, that's like 10 times harder. But what this gets down to is the point is you're literally just adapting to your opponent. What information is your opponent presenting to you, and what can you get away with?
Yep, I actually think that's the perfect way to put it, is that the reason you don't have those set game plans is because that it's still so important to know your lines and that's why I think reps with Kano is actually one of the most important things. With a lot of other heroes, I find that I can theory craft and know the lines that I want to play to during a game, but Kano is so adaptive and changes so much during the course of the game that I could have set up a certain game plan early in the game, whether that be through pitching or the way that maybe I've set up an Arsenal card, and then on the next turn that could completely change because of how my opponents played. I might have been planning to block with 2 cards and come with 2 cards, and then they basically take a turn off for whatever reason it is to set something up, and now I have to reassess the damage I can output. Maybe I could have blocked with 1 card, but actually if I don't block that card, it's worth more damage. So these things are just happening, and then you also need to consider, okay, well, is there any point that I want to try and play off the top of my deck? Like, what's the value of playing off the top of my deck? I think that's the one thing that's really probably tough to grasp, Brendan, right? Is that sometimes
risk versus reward, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, do I have to? For me, I don't like doing it, and I don't think it's a good way to play Kano or a good way to win the game, because you don't have to. If my opponent is not forcing me to play off the top of the deck to beat them, then I'm not going to do it. But sometimes your opponent does force you, and sometimes it may be because they present, they Kodachi and you're at 4, and they go Razor Reflex, and you got to have it. You just got to have it, and that's it, right? But there's also, like, when you play against Shane, they have the Spell Void item. You literally have to get some burn in at some point, take a bunch of damage and burn them so you can get to a certain, extent to where you can even kill them, because the Spell Void item is so good. So it's all about, like what I talk about. It's just like, what can I get away with? How much can I take? And that's going to influence your lines. But I want to talk about something that's the most important thing for Kano, like in terms of cards and stuff. I don't even know. I don't know how to phrase it if it's like the most important thing, but it's resources, right? The tunic resource is huge, and you're only going to, in a game of Blitz, you're only going to steal once, probably max, but maybe could change, right? But the amount of things you're able to do when you have the tunic resources versus when you don't, they're astronomical. And if we want to take this, if we're on level 2 right now, if we want to take this to level 10, we'll talk about the most powerful card in Kano, which is probably not what you thought it was, and it is 100%, without a doubt, energy potion. What you're able to do when you have an energy potion on the field versus when you don't, or when you have 2, is basically a fair deck, or maybe not a fair deck, but a good deck versus absolute degeneracy. Like, energy potions are insane.
Yeah, I've definitely both had some ridiculous turns and been down the barrel of some ridiculous turns thanks to energy potion. If you have a hanging resource that now is turned into a card, it allows you to pay for things like Metacarpus on multiple cards. It does. The 2 resources cannot be understated. The 1 tunic resource cannot be understated. Like, they can do so much. There's so much opportunity there.
Mm-hmm. And before we get into like strengths and weaknesses, let's quickly summarize how to win with Kano, right? So the most important thing, in my mind, is put in the practice, get in the reps, because you need to know what your game plan is and how you can adapt it all the time. It's a very kind of fluctuating game plan, and it's going to change match to match, and hero to hero. A lot of other decks are going to be used to like having a certain game plan versus a hero. You could have like 8 to 10 different game plans versus IRA. You might have a general macro plan, but your micro play is going to change drastically, depending on what they present to you. And probably the best high level tip I can give to you as Kano is always play to your outs. Don't try to go for something when you don't have to. Like, don't burn an opponent when you don't have lethal, or don't burn an opponent when they might have the Sigil Arsenal, but you do, and you don't play around it, but then you don't have to win this turn and you just get blown out by a Sigil. There's no reason to take these risks and lose games when you aren't being forced to. Yes, if you're presented lethal, sometimes you are going to go off the top. Sometimes you are going to have to, rip it and win. But most of the time, it's going to be playing to your outs. So I've been in multiple situations of Kano where my opponent I've drawn an energy potion a tome and 2 cards, and they're both red, and my opponent is going to kill me this turn. I just really can't block. And I have played the energy potion, boots, tomed, draw 2 cards, and been able to draw 12 value of lock to survive that turn, and then drawn my 4, and they've been all blue, used my talismanic lens, and killed them on the next turn. And you would probably never think as a Kano player, like, oh, I'm going to be able to boots, draw 2 cards with tome, use every single card in my hand to block, and still be able to win this game. You can. As Kano, you're always in the game.
Yep, it buys you time to find the right hand to then try and kill them. So, Brendan, anything else on, I guess, ways to win with Kano that you want to cover?
Just practice, and a little anecdote for your armor. Talismanic Lens is one of the strongest cards in the deck. Use it wisely.
That's a great piece of info. So, keeping in with our pod, we want to keep this still digestible in terms of time. So we are getting towards, I guess, the end of the pod. What we might do now is we've got some strengths and weaknesses that I think are really important. We've kind of gone through the discussion piece of this pod around the cards. Brendan given sort of our views and how we like to play those and the way they interact with one another. We've talked about building the deck, playing the deck, winning with the deck. Let's go ahead, Brendan. Let's list some of these strengths and weaknesses of this deck, some of these pure facts that we have, and then let's get into some matchups as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to rip through this list because I wrote it pretty comprehensively. Hayden, if you have something, just interject, just interrupt me. Starting with the strengths. You can heavily punish, players who don't understand Kano, and a lot of people don't. It's a complicated class. People don't put time into it, and yeah, if they don't know how to play Kano, they're going to make mistakes, and you can punish them heavily. So it's a really good deck into most metas. With that said, the gameplay of, like we talked about as well, the gameplay of Kano is very dynamic. You're always adjusting to your opponent's strategy. You can pivot to an OTK if they have 4 null rune. You can just kill them straight up if they overextend into you. It's very, very dynamic, and that, for me, makes it super fun. It's impossible to turtle Kano. Nobody can fatigue you out. You can't just throw up defenses and try to, survive through Kano. It's always you're always on the clock, and Kano will kill you. Opponents will use the incorrect armor against you, especially in Classic Constructed. So if you do have that GTL Kano, you do have some attack actions in, they're used to playing against a wizard that's going to burn them. They put in 3 null rune, and now you play a Nourishing Emptiness, and they can't block the Dominate, right? Really, really good. You can play on your opponent's turn. We talked about this, like this is obviously a core 10 of Kano. It's important to note that this is highly overrated in the sense that for a lot of Kano players, and the most successful ones I know, they play on the opponent's turn, but only at the appropriate times, which is a lot less than you think. You're not going to be playing on your turn, playing on the opponent's turn every single cycle. You usually play on your opponent's turn when you're killing them, or they've given you an opening to burn them for a significant amount of damage. So we talked about the damage. Yeah, the damage is unblockable, right? The defense value on their cards doesn't matter. If it's in Blitz, they might still have these defense actions in there, all these crap cards that you're going to abuse. So you're now making them use their resource base and their curve as a way to kind of survive. If you look at most of the Blitz decks, the reason their blue counts are as high as they are is because they don't want to get burnt out by Kano. There was actually, kind of popularly a very strong Blitz deck in the early days that was aggro Viscerai. They're super fast, but it got hated out of the format because it was bad to Flick Flack, which I won again. But it also auto lost to Kano. And there's going to be a lot of decks that auto lose to Kano in that format. Kano has a super high skill floor. Not super high. Kano has a high skill floor. But once you get in the reps, you get that first 50 games, first 100 games, you'll know what to do. You'll know the lines. That being said, there's a caveat. The skill floor is high, right? So you got to play more than you do in other decks. But the skill ceiling is extremely high. I think it's the highest in the game, which you should look at as a good thing, because you can play this deck every single week on, at every tournament, and you can always be learning. That I don't believe that's the same for every deck that's out there in the format. So Kano is kind of like the deck that will, in my opinion, teaches you the most about the game. So sometimes your opponent's deck is just going to not give them what they need. They're going to draw all reds, and you're just going to steal games. So if you like that, sometimes you roll the dice and your opponent just draws crap, they lose. Which I guess is true in any matchup, but it's even worse in Kano. And you'll hear the salt. Don't worry. We talked about this one already. So you're always a threat, and you're always in control of the game. Kano is kind of, no matter where the game is, your opponent could be at 20 life, you can be at 1. you can always win the game. So no matter how nutty your opponent draws, literally anything, Kano's always got some convoluted line to win that game. And that's why I like it the most. And we'll talk about the weakness of that one too soon. And don't be surprised if people don't run the correct amount of null rune against you, especially in Classic Constructed. So currently in Classic Constructed, a lot of people actually don't have null rune in their sideboard to add more cards to other matchups. So they want to have more cards to just play against what they think is more relevant matchups. So if you show up to a CC tournament with a Kano deck, it's not very unlikely that your opponent will have no null rune in their sideboard or not enough. Kind of more popularly, Matt Rogers did this with his Dorinthia deck. So Kano is the dark horse. He's the apex of theoretical power in the game. If there's something degenerate that's going to break the format, it's likely to, Kano is going to be a top contender. So always a threat to win a tournament, in my opinion.
Yep. Cool. Okay. And what about weaknesses, Brendan? Why don't you talk us through some of these weaknesses that you see with Kano and that we've kind of both talked about?
Yeah, so as I'm getting slightly parched here, but to understand the weaknesses of Kano, I think we have to take into account that, in my opinion, the best deck is completely undiscovered. And I just have to I'm going to be going off the current deck list to talk about the downsides of this. So firstly, that being said, you can literally just draw straight blues. Your deck can give you crap, and you can just lose games. And that was what initially turned me off of Kano, as playing Kano, you can lose to anybody. You can lose to Timmy on Ira for his first day where he draws double raise or double sigil and just destroys you, right? And your deck gives you crap.
Yeah. You can also draw all reds, right? Not just all blues, you can also draw all reds. Or
sorry, all reds is even worse. I don't know what I'm saying. Yeah, the deck can just not give you what you need, and it sucks. So you draw all the reds and you Kano all the blues. And you can lose to anyone. And yeah, there's more variance with this deck inherently than I think something like Drone Ira or just Ira in general, which is going to be more consistent. And if you just got to be okay with that. The deck can be super frustrating sometimes and feel like there's nothing you can do. This is a very small percentage of time, and usually you're wrong. Usually there is a way to get out. There is a convoluted line to win the game, but sometimes as Kano, if your opponent just presents a bunch of damage to you and just disregards what you can do as Kano, that can just be an actively good strategy, and there's nothing you can do because your deck just literally doesn't have enough damage in those top X cards you need to beat them, and that's not a good feeling. So if we look at Monarch, Prism and Chain were printed. Prism is it seems like it was made to hate out Kano. You can't clear the auras unless you have attack actions or run something like Tower Sharp. Both things can probably be pretty rough for your deck. So Prism looks like it was meant to constrain a very strong Kano deck, sort of in its fundamental design. And if you're playing Blitz, Spell Void items just made your life, 100 times harder. So you got to deal with that. So there are many lines both on a macro and micro level. So the deck can be very complicated and overwhelming as you start getting into it. And you're going to have to deeply analyze your own play to improve past what is sort of average, right? You can just rip off the top and RNG maybe 20-30% of your wins, but this does not make you a good Kano, and you're not going to have fun on the deck. So my favorite weakness, people hate your deck. It's a game of solitaire, and you're the only one that gets to have fun. Salty opponents are the standard. Most of them have no idea how to play the class and will chalk every loss up to their own luck. I said, but this is okay because those people are bad, and they'll never be good. But yeah, the Kano salt is real, and a lot of people will give you an earful. Some people complain about Kano fatigue, which is an effect some players talk about feeling after they played the deck back to back to back for many rounds due to its complexity. Players would say that they would never bring Kano. Some would say that they would never bring Kano to a tournament because of how mentally taxing the deck can be. I think, as a small note, in Blitz, I totally disagree. I think you just need the reps and to be able to avoid tilt when you lose to Timmy first day on Ira, who draws double sigil, all that stuff. But it happens. The more reps you have, the easier. I don't get the mental thing.
I think it depends, right? Because I know from the Auckland Blitz calling, talking to Jason and Dan who played the Kano deck.
That's OTK though.
Yeah, had an OTK win, so it can depend. So a lot of the time against the Iras, they were trying to set up OTKs, so they were playing 20, 25-minute rounds, pretty mentally taxing. So I think it could depend, right?
Mm-hmm. And lastly, Kano is one of the higher variance decks. We talked about you can lose to anyone. You can just not draw what you need to. This is heavily mitigated with experience and tight play on the deck. Still, it's nothing like Ira Drone and Blitz. So if that's what you enjoy, Kano is going to be a culture shock for you.
Mm-hmm. All right, Brendan, so we've talked strengths, we've talked weaknesses of the Wizard class and Kano. Let's get into some of the matchups. Brendan, you're going to talk to the Blitz side. I'm going to talk to more of the Classic Constructed side. Let's just rattle off the heroes, and we'll start with you on each of them. So why don't we kick it off with Prism, the new dog in town.
Yep, the new dog and the new bully. So Prism and Blitz, really tough. I think this is the only matchup as Kano where you sub out Talismanic Lens and play Arcanite Skullcap, simply because if they play Herald of Erudition, you almost lose the game on the spot. Very tough. That, alongside the Spell Void 2 armor, Prism is just a terrible matchup for Kano, and it's I think it's unwinnable against a good Prism. On top of the Spell Void, there is also the Heralds that hit for 7 and have relevant on hit triggers, so very bad matchup for Kano.
Yeah, I think in the Class Constructed world, it's actually, to be honest, tougher because
It's worse.
Yeah, you can't just spike them over maybe like a really, if you get to go second, they don't draw Herald on turn 1 when they start, and you get to present some good damage and then spike on their turn. You don't get that opportunity in CC. They have more chances, more time with their 40 life to draw their Heralds, to hit you with multiple Heralds of protection, draw their Eruditions, etc. So I actually think it's tougher.
Agreed. Yep. Auras are also going to be more prevalent. Yeah, very tough. I think theoretical auto loss in CC.
Yep. So we started with the tough one.
Well, now on to another tough one.
Yeah, Rhinar. What do you think about Rhinar and Blitz?
Yep, Rhinar very tough. Basically, you have to make a lot of decisions with very little information. So you'll have a lot of times when they come with that first Intimidate, whether it's on a barraging beatdown or something else, you kind of have to make the decision right there. Do I try to burn them? And then if they are if you have gotten a little bit of chip damage, do I try to kill them? Because they can actually kill you on turn 0. They can intimidate every card in your hand and just kill you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, depending on your equipment. I think it's a pretty. I just want to talk about Blitz as well because I have played this matchup a lot. Because Rhino was a deck that I really liked in Blitz and was playing a bunch of. It is quite coin flippy, I think, and it can really depend on basically just that first turn draw. One of the cool things you can do is Kano though against Rhino is you can actually flip a tome off the top of your deck and banish it, and then play it after they've intimidated your hand, like when their attack comes in, so that you can flip a Tome of the Aether Wind, draw 2 cards post them doing all their banish, and be able to break their barraging beatdowns, which is quite cool. Quite a cool little play there.
Yeah, and if every time I bought a scratch-off ticket I won, I'd be a billionaire.
To be honest, I've done that multiple times. It's not even that unlikely of a play, to be honest. You just have to Talismanic Lens into it sometimes because you just have to go for it. But I've done it multiple times, and had that to be a couple of times playing into it. I think from the Classic Constructor perspective, it's less sort of coin flippy. I think on the face of it, it's a really tough matchup for Kano into Rhino because you just don't get to make that play pattern of block with 2 cards, come back with 2 cards, because often they're intimidating your whole hand, and basically you get to play suboptimal lines, which is not where you want to be. But I do think you can actually set up your deck in a way that you're trying to deliver a lot more 5-card hands, and where they let you block, and then you get to present damage, and then those Storm Traders just do a ton of work because they basically, to try and force lethal, they're going to have to throw their whole hand at it. So it's a closer matchup than you might think, but still favored to Rhino. Dorinthia, probably, still, if not still, the most popular hero running around. What do you think about the Blitz?
You'd be surprised. Season 2, I face actually very few Dorinthias. I think that it's like 20% or less in the meta, where I think we're seeing close to 70 towards the end of Season 1. But yeah, favorable for Kano. Dorinthia, basically, when they do beat you, they just get kind of a nutty draw in Blitz, and they'll just come way over the top. Eyes on Determination, Steel Blade Supremacy, these cards are really hard to beat. But if you're able to extend the game out, they don't have too many blues in the deck, and when they do have to pitch a blue, they have a really hard time continuing that turn. And yeah, they're Dorinthia players, so naturally they're easier.
I feel your love for Dorinthia just oozing out of those statements. I think in CC, I actually like this matchup from a Kano perspective. From the times I've played it, I preferred to be on the Kano side. This is a matchup where you can really enact that game plan of, block out with 2 cards, chip damage with a Voltic Bolts with your Spindles, things like that. And then you can really punish them on some big turns where you catch them with 1 blue, and you can set up some big damage. So Dorinthia is pretty consistent with the damage they can do, and they have these turns they can really spike with like Warriors Valors and Steelblade Supremacies, of course. But they're also going to have these downturns where they just have to come in with like a blade for 3 or maybe a sharpened steel plus the blade for 6, and those are the turns where you just take the damage and you just throw back big hands in response, or set up your arsenal as well. So I think it's pretty close, but I actually personally prefer being on the Kano side of this matchup.
Yep, and I will go ahead and introduce the Blitz only true boogeyman of the format, Ira. So a hard matchup in Blitz, but you're in control. The faster they dig to double sigil, double razor, the worse off you are. Their kind of Snapdragon Scalar's turns is their pivot turn and is the most important turn for them. Command and Cookout for 7 really sucks as Kano because you have to double card plus Tunic or triple card, all of which are bad scenarios. But if you play Cindering Foresight, you can get around that. That being said, I definitely have a very good win rate versus Ira in this skirmish season, but I do think that it is one of the closer 50-50 matchups.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And in constructed, of course, all right.
Katsu. How's Katsu?
That's a good point, actually. Why don't we talk about Katsu here now? We're talking about the ninjas. Katsu, I think, is a matchup that I'm more than happy to play. It can really depend. So if they're playing like a super low to the ground aggressive version with belittles and whatnot, I think that's tougher. It's actually just a straight race at that point, and it can be difficult. It can really come down to who's going second in that matchup a lot. It's quite close. If it's more of a more traditional mid range, they're really focused on surging lines and on hit effects. I think that matchup is pretty easy for you. To be honest, I think that's a pretty good matchup for you. All right, let's talk about a man who likes to swing a big hammer in the form of Bravo. What do you think of Bravo and Blitz as a matchup? What are the kind of the key considerations here?
Yeah, so I think while the Bravo player can dominate and kill you quite fast if their life total is healthy, you're generally favored in this matchup, and the most important tool in your disposal is going to be that Stir Forked combo. I think that there is not a lot of Bravo players kind of out right now compared to the rest of the years. I think there's more. This matchup might get closer to 50-50, but so far I've had a lot of success in it.
Yeah, so I've actually had some experience. I played Bravo at the end of Season 1. With a bit of guidance from the man himself, Kale McCreath, give me a bit of insight into this matchup, and I actually found that I was able to win about 50% of the Kano matchups. I actually even went positive for a while, and that's actually more of probably a little bit on the flip side of what you said. It wasn't so much an aggressive dominate play. It was actually more of a longer to mid game plan where you are really utilizing your blues, coming in with your 3-cost attacks to try and force them to block out cards, and then keeping your life high enough to dominate something before they get to their key sort of stir fork turn. So it's an interesting matchup for sure. And then in constructed, it's actually kind of similar, to be honest. Kano, you want to be able to blast through. They're probably going to play barrier 3, maybe even barrier 4, to be honest. So you need to be able to blast through those barriers with big turns. So outside of that, you're just trying to make sure that you can survive through their key. So basically, if they can dominate things like Crippling Crush early on, it's going to be difficult for you because they've got the damage in early. But if they don't get damage through you early and you're able to start setting up your turns and maybe get a bit of chip damage here and there, it can be super important. A card like Cindering Foresight is just huge in that matchup, though, in Constructed. In Classic, sorry. All right. Do you want to talk to us about one of your favorite heroes, Brendan and Azalea?
So yeah, I'm looking at our notes sheet, and the only comment here is LOL. So I think that sums it up pretty well. Yeah, it's very easy matchup for Kano, despite all the sleep darts you may get hit by. Yeah, so they tend to be quite redliner and Blitz, very easy. I don't know how you lose this one.
Yeah, I think you just blow them out. Right? I think it's actually much tougher in a Classic Constructed. They have the life to play with to get off cards like Sleep Dart and Ridden Ledger, etc. So it's actually pretty close, I think, with Azalea and Constructed. I think you're slight favor, but if they know their lines they're playing to and have a really active plan against you, if you get off to sort of a slow start, you get hit with a couple of dominate arrows early game. And you don't have the hands to punish that. You don't have a 4 or 5 card hand that can punish the dominate. Then it can be tough for you.
Yeah, and Hayden, I have to bring us back a little bit because you skipped over Kano.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let's go back to Kano. So this is probably one of the most in-depth, I guess, matchup. So how does that play out in the Blitz mirror?
In depth, Matt. I don't know if you read my notes and you're trolling me or what, but yeah, in Blitz, this is the mirror is probably one of the lowest skill coin flips in the game. It's literally terrible. That being said, as a Kano, you can definitely make a wrong decision. After that, it is completely draws. It is
Interesting. Okay,
pretty
so
bad.
I kind of agree and disagree from my experience of playing Kano in Season 1 and playing the Blitz Mirror. I think I agree on the last point that if someone misplays, they're probably going to lose the game. But I think there's some decisions to be made. It really is a game of chicken a little bit, right? Like who blinks first. And if you're going second, you've got a big advantage because you get to take cards out of the opponent first. But
Yeah, going second is very important.
yeah, it's huge.
I do stick to I understand the game of chicken. I definitely don't think that it's like skill intensive whatsoever, other than the mitigation of mistakes, which is a skill in itself, of course. But it's the most draw dependent matchup I've ever seen because like you'll just get locked. Like you talk about playing chicken, but you'll get locked in like both players having stir forked, and there's like nothing you can do. And if they're a blue up on you, they'll be able to Kano and potentially use a tunic resource to come in for 3 with like a lessons in lava. Rip a card out of your hand, then they can stir fork you after, and you can't stir fork back. It's terrible.
Yeah. So I agree, but I think there's some level because players have to know how to do that in the first place. Whereas you just said it's the most sort of coin flipping matchup you've ever seen. Have you not played a class constructed chain mirror?
I have played a classic constructed chain mirror, and it's I don't know. It's like they're my children. I hate them both the same.
All right. Well, on that note, Kano Constructed is pretty similar, to be honest. It's less, I guess, playing chicken. It is pretty draw dependent though. Cards that are really important in that matchup. Tome of Fiendal becomes really important in the class constructed because you have more turns. That life is pretty important. As well as cards just like that push damage. So your Aether Spindles, your Voltic Bolts, really important as that as well because they get above the arcane barrier. Viserai, Brendan, anything you want to say about Viserai in Blitz? We haven't seen it as much in Blitz, more the OTKs and some of the mid-range decks that have floated around in Season 1.
Yeah, current iterations of this deck are almost an auto win in Blitz. OTK just can't do anything to you, and you'll just destroy them. It's unfortunate that nobody plays Aggro Viserai anymore. It would have a better chance against you. But Aggro Viserai, just heavy red deck, pretty easy to beat as well. That being said, people can play red decks against Kano, and they can just play out all their cards, and they can beat you sometimes because your deck's not going to feed you what you need.
Yeah, I think it's matchup and construct. I haven't really played, to be honest. It's probably 2 of the least played heroes in classic constructed. I think I've played it maybe 2 or 3 times. It felt pretty favorable for Kano. Just felt like Viserai couldn't get out much damage unless they were a pretty aggressive deck. But their cards like they're trying to build up to these 9th blades and what's the one that has dominate?
Archnight's Ascendancy.
Yeah, Archnight's Ascendancy. It's just really difficult, and you get to punish them for it. But speaking of red line decks and just putting out damage there and just laying it on the table and seeing if you can kill them, boost dash and the mech class.
So I wish the boost dash played like that, but the better ones I played against don't necessarily do that. But yeah, absolutely, that deck presents tons of damage. So in Blitz, this is like one of the hardest matchups. Chain and Prism took the hardest to a new level, to where it's like it's like Mission Impossible 18 trying to beat them. But yeah, boost dash Mac very very hard due to their null rune and their ability to go extremely wide. The thing is, like, the pistol for 2 hurts a lot when you start at 15, and if you block with 1 card from hand, it's like really unlikely you're going to be able to go off. They make you answer that question really early so they can have a lot of cards at hand and make you kind of block before you have information, which is like, what do they have in their hand? How wide can they go? Can I try to kill them this turn? So yeah, boost dash very hard.
They also have access to a lot of extra resources, whether it be that they play the Vest of the first fist or they play the Tickler Hard and are getting an extra, needing resources through their boost turns. They can also, of course, be playing Tickler Core and even some playing Hyperdrive for their big turns. So they're not actually expending their resources to go off. They can still be holding back blues to punish you if you try and go back in response. So yeah, that matchup seems pretty tough. In Constructed, I would probably talk more about the traditional mid-range mech decks we've seen. Tended to be quite a tough matchup, to be honest. They are able to exert a lot of pressure, but also have a lot of blues in their deck and can play Nullrune 4 because of the headpiece. So just really difficult to get through that. Cindering Foresight is like your best friend in that matchup, though. That's the way that you hit them, is when they start to try and push their big turns, you hit them back.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about? Let's just talk about chain next. I think it's pretty important as a matchup.
Sure. So yeah, Chain and Blitz is very hard due to Null Rune 3 plus Spell Void 2 Hood. You have to follow a pretty specific play pattern to beat them, which is pretty different from Ira. Ira, you can play generally kind of slow, poke them, and play a very controlled game plan. But against Shane, you have to what you're going to have to do is you're going to have, when they don't have enough damage to kill you, or you can kind of take their damage on one of the early turns. You have to go off the top and burn them out. Either use Talismanic Lens. I mean, you don't have to go off the top with no information, but you have to burn them low, so that you can actually kill them through Spell Void 2. Because Spell Void 2 is the most busted thing that's ever been printed when it comes to being a Kano player. But yeah, I mean, Shane can present 15 damage every turn pretty easily, so it's not good.
Yeah, it felt pretty similar in Class Constructed. You have access to your Null Rune. It actually feels a bit better, I think, for Kano in Class Constructed. I haven't played it too much. The games I've played so far have been, probably within a turn of each other, but it still felt chain favored. But I think there is probably a way to get the Kano deck to be favored, to be honest, against chain. But it might come at the expense of some of your other matchups. So it's definitely a balancing thing. What do we got left? Bolton. Yeah, anything you want to say about Sir Bolton or Bolton?
Yeah, and Blitz are extremely favored. You can play passively, poke, stir forked. They can't block Arcane efficiently due to the research base of that deck. Yeah, you might get cheesed out with the Double Saber Lumina, Double Lumina one, but I mean that's just Blitz, tough beats sometimes. But yeah, you're super favored.
Yeah, I haven't played this matchup in Class Constructed, so I can talk from a theory standpoint and extrapolate from Blitz. But I think it's pretty similar. It's kind of a race in many aspects. They don't have good ways to block your attacks because they're probably playing mostly reds and yellows and probably very few or no blues in their deck. So basically, those first 3 turns are going to be super important as they're trying to amass their soul to then set up their big turns for Luminous Ascension or Cataclysms, things like that. So if you're able to get ahead of that, push through some really good damage in the first few turns, you're probably going to be going a long way. Cards like Aether Flare are super important into these aggressive decks because you just punish them for playing low blue counts and not wanting to throw cards from their hand.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, finally we got to end on Levia. So Levia, just my own little anecdote. Since Monarch came out, I've played around 200 or more games of Kano. I haven't played a single Levia. So theoretically, I think the matchup would be okay. I think it would be easier than Rhinar. That being said, they're going to be coming in for a lot of damage, so I don't see the game lasting long. And it might be one of those things where your deck kind of has to feed you what you need, but still, I think that it would be it'd be okay as Kano.
Yeah, I think in Class Constructed you're going to be pretty favored here. Again, haven't played it, but just based on what Levia wants to do with. So far from what I have seen of decks in Class Constructed, trying to push these pretty sizable damage turns, maybe even using Hexagore at some point, which isn't really going to help them in their matchup. I think you can just push your damage better than they can, to be honest. So I think you're probably favored there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, and in closing, to wrap up our Wizard 101, the Chamber of Secrets, how to beat it, how to beat Kano. So there's 2 strategies. There's 2. Right? So you play smart. Playing smart means you always present as little information as possible to the Kano player. The more cards that are unknown, X in your hand, X in arsenal, the harder it is for Kano to kill you. The more you play out your hand, the easier it is for Kano to decide how many cards they need to commit and how many they can keep to burn you soon after. Pitch to block important things like Sonic Boom, Aether Flare, Lessons in Lava. Not blocking these can lead to you dying from very, very high health values. Number 2, which is my favorite way, play like a monkey. Lower and block what you can, but just play out your entire hand every turn and put on the max pressure. Kano's deck sometimes won't give the player what they need to kill you. If you like stealing wins in RNG, this is the strategy for you. And in quotations, make them have it.
All right. So what would be your suggestion of the 2 streams there to play, Brendan?
Bro, honestly, it ends up the same. That is the kind of the mental struggle I go through with Kano is I have to have these cathartic moments where I realize that the skill level of my opponent is completely irrelevant. And if they just play out their whole hand, like my win rate is probably less than when they play smart. Obviously, it's all anecdotal and it's on small data, but yeah, it's really irritating. It's really, really frustrating.
I think that I might extrapolate a little bit to go to Classic Constructed because that feels very Blitz focused. I think just as we wrap us up, that in Classic Constructed, I think obviously RNG or just variances is a lot lower as a format. So that I think improves personally my enjoyability of Kano. While it might be tougher because other decks you can't spike them, I think you also don't just get spiked on the other side. So you get this opportunity to develop your game plans. And I would say that if you are trying to beat a Kano in Classic Constructed, for instance, you have to play really tight. So the same things apply that Brendan said, block those key cards that have on hit effects. So your Sonic Booms, your Aether Flares, Lessons in Lava, etc. Work out when you can take damage and when you can't take damage. And the opportunity cost of the damage is so important. So a Volta Bolt for 6 could be correct to block, or it might be incorrect to block. It just depends on where that's going to put you on the life total threshold, which is something we talked about during this podcast. If it's going to put you into the danger zone, then it's definitely not going to be worth it. If you can't present back sufficient damage to make up for that damage and either take their entire hand plus push some damage, then you probably should be blocking it in some degree. So yeah, there's a few things to consider there in Classic Constructed. I think it's you get to play a few more turn cycles, so you get to make some of these decisions, and instead of, I guess, just making them have it, at some point in the game, they're going to have it because there's more turns for them to have it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So that concludes our first class deep dive. Let us know what you guys think of this format. If you want to see more of it, we're planning to do all the classes, but more importantly, go ahead and comment below the video or shoot us an email with what class you want to see next. And it's pretty likely not a lot of people will do that. So if you shoot it in, maybe we'll get your hero up. I'm hoping it's Azalea. Hayden, famously wrote, I think, like a 2-month-long article piece for that deck. He's a true student of the game when it comes to the Azalea plays. Isn't that right, Hayden?
Oh, student of the game in every way. All heroes and all classes are valid to me. Brendan, I don't pigeonhole.
Yes, I only choose every class except Azalea. It'll be good. It'll be good. Exactly. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for listening. That concludes episode 12 of Arsenal Pass. We will see you all next week.
See you later.